everyone. Welcome to the International Wellness Alliance's monthly mastermind call. I'm E.G. Sebastian. I will be your leader on these calls every second month. And some of you want to join my other events, you can. I will mention some of them if I remember. And one thing that I want to start with that is very important, that I made a mistake in the beginning of my career, is to have a sticky note that says, start recording. Because I went through webinars, and in the beginning I had between 0 and 5 people, and I learned to deliver, even if nobody shows up, deliver as if I had 100 people, because you can use the recording. And I deliver it, and it was not recording. The second thing to crucially important, equally important, is check if people can hear you. Because I recorded a couple of webinars, that was like 18 years ago, 17 years ago. So I don't think it happens anymore. But if you're muted somehow and you don't notice, you can do a whole webinar on mute. Yeah, make sure that you check on that as well. All right. So let me, first of all, while we do the housekeeping and introductions, put in the chat if you are okay with writing. If not, you can raise your hand and you can tell us. Put in the chat, why are you here today? What would you like to get out of this session? Out of the description, or because of the title, what made you show up here today? What made you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning in Australia and at the crack of dawn is 7 o'clock in California to come to this session? So I will get started. And first of all, I will introduce my partner in crime here, Larry Jacobson, who is a 2-time TEDx speaker, a award-winning best-selling author. I have his audiobook for The Boy Behind the Gate. I listened to it like 3 times. It's actually, it's a story, but it's very motivational. That, like, the first half of the book is like, it reads almost like a motivational story. It's a story about him sailing around the world for 6 years, and just the concept that's he covering in there, getting out of your comfort zone and all kind of stuff, is just, it was very uplifting for me. He is also a keynote speaker. He's, can I mention your fees, Larry?
Sure.
His fees are usually around $10,000, or exactly $10,000. And he's been a client of mine and now friend for about 6 years, I think. It's just, wow. And next I will let Larry introduce me. And this is kind of impromptu.
Okay, yeah. So I honestly don't remember how I met EG. I think I looked online for a coach who could help me.
It's through my quest.
Was
I
through
just
my
remembered.
quest?
Yes, Edan Curtis.
Don't correct me.
Go ahead. You were searching actually, because you told me that you were looking at this,
Really?
this person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I met EG, and he told me his prices and what he could do. And
Oh, sorry, I muted you. Hold on. Please mute yourself if
why did you mute me?
somebody was talking and I just saw your mic live, so I muted the live mic.
So you can see by EG's personality what attracted me to him. Happy, upbeat, very knowledgeable in building funnels and websites. EG built all of my websites, which are amazing. My main website, LarryJacobson.com, I think is now up to 60 pages or something like that. On my website for speaking coaching, which is called ownthestage.org, is only 4 pages. So, because it focuses just on one thing. And EG and I bounce ideas off of each other regularly on all topics, including personal coaching and business coaching and marketing. And
sometimes we even cry together.
Yeah, we do. We do. I can't imagine my work life without him.
Yeah, and the websites. So that was most of it built by my team, but I sometimes I get my hands down. I enjoy building websites, and when Larry prepares for his keynotes, I'm always there helping him prepare his PowerPoints and his introduction. He has his introduction down, but he still bounces it
Yeah.
off, tries to change it up sometimes.
You're pretty good at PowerPoint, I have to say. Although we have somebody here today who is going to be
Was a
challenging
master.
that. The
Anybody
master.
anybody needs help with PowerPoint, reach out to Ken. Ken is on the call here, so you can just private message him. All right,
And
so
we'll be getting into on another session how to use PowerPoint and how to properly, so that you don't experience what we call death by PowerPoint. Everybody's probably heard of that. Yes. So we'll be
yeah,
talking about that another
PowerPoint
time.
is getting a bad rep, but actually it's just bad if you use it badly. So yeah.
That's right.
So we got a
So
couple of
comments
things here,
here.
comments here in the chat. So be able to define and craft my signature story. So many stories I could share and too many pieces to my story. So not sure how to bring it all together in a good way. Perfect. I have so much to say, over 27 years of coaching and 47 of transformation. So have so much to thank you. Yes, I'm working on TEDx talk and hoping I get some tips. Wonderful. You are in the right place, Lisa. I'm here today because 2 a.m. is a Australian time, because I'm a speaker and I want to learn as much as I can about it. Yes, wonderful. You are definitely in the right place. I'm here to learn more about what Larry is doing these days. Ken, very cool. And yeah, so I've been speaking for 20 years. Well, next year it will be 20 years. Coaching for 20, speaking for 19. And Larry has been speaking for how many years?
How many is 12?
12 years, yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think 12.
we are like very different. Larry does more keynotes. I do more workshops. I do occasional keynotes. Larry does occasional workshops. Larry believes in writing out speeches. I don't believe in that. I just work off bullet points. So even if it's a keynote, I will somewhat wing it because I just go off my bullet points. And we will talk about how to structure keynotes and how to not get lost. Because especially in the beginning, you might zone out and forget what you are saying and how to get back on track. So we'll talk some of that, a little bit about that as well. So let's see, let's hop into a signature talk. What is it? Like I heard it many, many times years ago, and I'm like, what the heck is a signature program, signature talk? It is basically is a speech that establishes you as an authority in your field if you use it properly.
Good definition. I don't argue with you on this one.
It engages, is designed to engage and inspire your audience, often leading to further professional opportunities, such as getting hired by individual clients, book sales, getting more paid speaking, consulting, or if you have a online program, group coaching program, then you can sell more of that. But it is designed to be memorable and impactful, making you be known as the person of choice in your topic. So it is crucial to make your signature speech relevant to what you want to be known for. Also,
and to the audience that you're going to be speaking to.
yes. And there are two big whys. Like, why do I want to develop a signature story? And why am I the right fit with this story to this group, right? So Larry has a signature talk that he delivers over and over. Like if you hear the beginning, it will sound exactly the same. He doesn't have to, if he's invited somewhere, he doesn't have to recreate the wheel. They know him and they invite him because they love his story. And I know of other speakers who changed up their story And the organizer was very disappointed because that's not why they invited him. They wanted the audience to hear that specific story. But if he talks to management teams or to a group of retirement advisors, he will have a different twist inside of the presentation. But the core is the same. So we will help you develop your signature story. Now, what happens is many of us have experiences in our lives that perhaps defined us. Some of these stories we take for granted and we don't even think about them consciously. Like you went through some big challenge, you struggled, then you solved it. Some of us are ashamed of those experiences. One of my clients, an amazing friend, Tiffany Anisette, she was sexually abused as a teenager. And she wrote a book in graphic details about it. And she talks openly in her keynotes about it. And she's invited everywhere in the nation to speak to parents, to teen groups, to teachers. And she sells thousands and thousands of her books every year. And it is because she speaks openly, because she wants to protect other children from that from happening. And she also tells the world how she took that coal, that clump of dirt, and turned it into a diamond. And she has a program there to be a diamond. And she built it on that. So think of it, what kind of transformative story do you have in your life that you perhaps take for granted or not? Maybe you are aware of it, but your signature story will probably be wrapped around that.
And it will be a narrow niche. When you're giving your signature speech, you become known for that particular niche. And a niche rhymes with fish. This is what I was told by an English expert. So it's not niche, or so it's niche. That sometimes we think, oh, I know more than that. I speak about fear, for example, about managing fears. That's a narrow niche that not many other people speak about, but it's important, and it can apply to so many situations from personal to business. So that's kind of what I'm known for. I also can speak about leadership. I can speak about retirement. There are several categories I can speak about, but I don't. When someone looks at me, they say, "Oh, well, it's the sailing and the fear one that we want." So that's, and my brand is usually I'm wearing my yellow foul weather gear as well. So, one time I went in to do a speech not long ago, and I was wearing the yellow jacket, and it was in a room that was getting warmer and warmer. And I finally said, "Okay, how many of you in the audience know now that I'm a sailor?" And they all raised their hands, and I said, "Oh, good, I could take the jacket off." But so that's what they want. And that's what you want to be known for. Not that you're the broad person that can speak about everything. In marketing, we think about marketing an inch wide and a mile deep, rather than a mile wide and an inch deep. So instead of dabbling in everything, go deep into that one thing. So Lisa, when you give your TED talk, that's about one topic, one subject, right? Yeah. Okay.
A very narrow subject and covering only maybe 3 subpoints.
It depends. In general, people can't absorb more than 1 point per 10 minutes. So if you're giving a TED talk, which is 20 minutes, you kind of have 1.5 points you can make, or 1 point. I mean,
I think these days it's shorter.
Huh?
I think these days the TED talk is shorter, isn't it?
I think it's 18 minutes.
18, yeah.
Yeah.
And then depending upon the sponsor of the TED Talk, it can get very serious, the timing. When I gave the big TED Talk in San Francisco at Golden Gate, there was a person sitting in the front row with an iPad, and it had a timer on it. And when I started speaking, they started the timer, and it went from 18 minutes down, or 20 minutes, I think, at that time. And there, at about 10 minutes left, she holds it up like this at her, just at her chin. And then at 15 minutes, she's going like this, and she's now raising it up in her face. And when it was 16 minutes, she's going like this to make
Wow.
sure I knew. And I came in, I think, at 18 minutes and 2 seconds or something like that, and I made it.
Cool.
But to EG's point, that speech was written out word for word. So it was word for word, and I could recite it forwards and backwards. And that's because it was written out. And the reason it was written out so finely was the timing. You can't go over. If you go over, they just shut off your microphone. So if you have a bullet point and you just start talking about it, you might go off into a tangent, which we don't want you to do.
So yeah, we are all very different. We learn differently. We have different preferences and everything. And Larry, even these days, sometimes he will write out his speech. Sometimes he will read it, and he learned to read it masterfully. He has a teleprompter, so I could not do that. I yeah. So I work off of bullet points, and he was always fearless. He had no fear of public speaking. I used to have a phobia of public speaking. So we have lots of differences. And what I want you to understand is that these differences should not be confusing, but rather decide for yourself what is the best way for you. Does it help me if I write it down and read it? Like I think, and many think that if you write it out and you forget one point, now you lost. So that's why some suggest not to write it. Others will tell you to write it out, but like find out for yourself what works best.
And
And
I
make
like
sure
to
that
write it. I like to write it so I don't lose a point, so I
yeah,
don't forget it. So
yeah.
what I do in general, if I'm giving an important keynote, well, all keynotes are important, but if I'm giving a keynote, I will write the whole thing, the whole speech out. I will have in the speech, say I'm reading, there's a paragraph, and then I want to have a click for the slideshow, for a slide behind me. In the written speech is a little picture of that slide, so I know that that's when I click for that next slide. So it's foolproof is basically what I'm saying. And so I have it in a 3-ring binder on 8.5 by 11 sheets. I don't use note cards, but I use a binder. And the reason I use a binder is Barack Obama used to use a binder. And a lot of presidents do. They go up to their podium and they're waiting for them as their 3-ring binder. I found a trick, though, is that I put each sheet into a plastic sheet protector, and that way you can't hear it when I'm turning the page.
And I
And
used to
then,
do similar with my workshops, yeah, with the
yeah,
little graphic, like I
yes,
know when to click. And so
right.
in the beginning, I would write down very detailed, like what I have to do.
Now, keep in mind, even if it's written out, I practice it enough so that I really don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there if I need the crutch, but in general, I don't need it.
And I know that I attended many of Larry's presentations, and I know that sometimes you just deliver it. You don't have it
Yeah.
right there. Yeah. So all right, Larry. So yeah, Larry got trained by world champions, and he's a certified world-class public speaking coach, and he will lead us through the process that he learned throughout that and combined with his experience for how to craft that powerful signature talk.
So thank you,
And
E.G.
before I forget, if anybody's interested how to chart for your speaking, please put it in the chat so we can touch upon that at the end as well.
And I'm also curious as to how many people here have even if it's small, fear of speaking. And if you do, I just want you to know it's very common. In fact, it's the number one fear of Americans is speaking in public. Now, I'm not sure if that includes Aussies, but I think it might. And that means that more people are afraid of public speaking than they are of dying.
They would rather die than give a speech.
Which means at a funeral, they would rather be in the box rather than behind the podium. So it can be pretty bad. But honestly, the breathing, that's 6 times. You do that 6 times, you become the champion, right? This is behind stage. Don't do it too loud if your microphone is turned on. Right, Jennifer. Once you get started, you're rolling.
The adrenaline kicks in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to have, I still have that before keynotes. I don't have it before workshops.
Let me just address a couple of things here. One is that you have to remember that the audience wants you to succeed. And when you think about that, you're going, oh, all these people want me to succeed, to give a good speech. That means they're on your team. One trick that you can do is before the speech, if you have a chance to go into the audience and to meet people, or maybe before everybody's mingling around before they're sitting down, mingle in there with them and meet somebody, meet a couple of people. And then when you're on stage, you look for those people, and those are your anchors. They're your friends, and they support you.
The way I learned it, and after that, let's get into the meat of it. But the way I learned it is find a smiling, nodding face in the crowd, talk to that person, and then pan out my gaze, look at other people, and find another smiling, nodding face. Then talk to that person, and then another one, and slowly, you'll notice that everybody is smiling and nodding, or at least most people. So that was very helpful for me. But yeah, let's get in the meat of it. Go ahead.
Here's something to write down. You look to one, speak to all. Look to one, speak to all. And Rochelle has a great point, which she says, I always bring people to her speeches, and put them in the audience so that then she has those people in the audience as friends. Great, absolutely.
That's what somebody did to me today. I went to somebody did pitch to investors, and I coached her, and she said, "Can you please attend so I have at least one person who I know there?" And so yeah, that's
right.
Right.
It makes a difference. So, in the structure of a speech, the actual structure of a speech we're going to do next time, I think. Today, what we're going to do is how to tell a story, because basically your speech is a story, but you have stories within the overall speech. And the best way to make a point is with a story. But the problem is that many of us tend to go on a little bit too long about certain aspects of a story. And we don't know what the direction should be for the story. Christine's laughing. She's going, yeah. Right? And we all do it. I mean, I tell a story and then, I want to go off and tell this too. But I remember, what's the point here? What are we trying to get across? So the first thing that we start with, there's really, you can call it, there's 3 parts or 5 parts or 9 parts to a story. But today we're going to get into kind of the weeds, the details. So we're going to go through 9 different categories. The first one is curiosity. You want to make your audience curious as to something about you or something that might affect them. So, for example, I opened my TED Talk with the following, and see if this makes you curious. If I were to ask you what the scariest moment of your life was, could you tell me? What about the most exciting? The most thrilling? Well, if you were to ask me the same questions, the answer might surprise you. because they all happened on the same day. Are you curious? Yes. So you want to know what's next. So what can you ask the audience or engage the audience with? And we're going to, another time, we're going to talk about your big bang opening. Actually, I'm going to give one hint right now, because I just can't take it when people do this. Do not come out on stage and say, "Hi, I'm Larry Jacobson. How y'all doing?" You don't really care how they're doing, and they don't care how you're doing. They are there to hear your speech. Get started. You just got introduced, most likely, from somebody saying, "Now, Larry Jacobson." I don't have to come out and repeat that, or say good afternoon, or good morning, or glad we're all here.
Thank you for having me, or any
Thanks
of
for
those.
having me. Right. None of that. Just go right into your big bang opening.
Let me just chime in here for a second. So in the beginning, I told you about your transformative story that made something that happened in your life. Maybe if you want to put it in the chat. And then when you open the opening question or shocking statement, like, did you know that every year we lose more than 80,000 teenagers in the United States due to road, like car accidents? And I'm here today
that gets you curious.
And I'm here today to tell you how we can reduce that number. And there are like specific, like how California, for example, reduced it by like 30,000 a year. So now right away they think, whoa, what? Like, what can we do? Like one state does it differently. So what is that transformative story that you have, and how can you open related to that, either with a question, like how many of you here today, in this case, have a teenage child or a child who will be driving sometime soon, right? Go ahead.
Good. So the opening has, you try to include in the opening your, what I call your foundational phrase, what the whole speech is going to be about. So my speech is going to be about fear. And you know that from my opening statement, my opening question. And I try to engage the audience right away, because the audience really doesn't, I hate to say this, but they don't care about you. They care about your message and how it affects them. That's, just keep that in mind when you're writing your speech. Let me give you one more tip here that is not in with this first point, but after you write your speech, go back and see how many U's, Y-O-U, you have versus I. Because while your story might be about you and you say, I did this and we did that and I did that, it has to really be, how does that story, which is about you, affect people in the audience?
And if you don't get trained, some by our personality style, we tend, like my first speeches, it was all about I, me.
Yeah. It can be, I did this and I did that, but look how this affects you. Can you do this? Would you do this? Would you do that? So you want to plant the seed of curiosity in your audience. The next point is circumstance. You want to set the circumstance, set the scene of what this story is going to be about. So you describe the scene. What can you hear, see, feel, think about the scene, about what's happening?
For example, Larry told me yesterday a story, which I thought it was my story, and I think it was. It says, it was a cold April day in 1988 when five guys jumped me and started punching me, fell down on the ground, and they kicked me for like 20 minutes. And when I stood up, and he said it's so beautiful, it's so graphically and long. And as I was going home with blood dripping down on my clothes, and I'm like, wow, did I tell you the story? Because actually that happened to me. They cracked my,
I made it up.
It went in, my teeth went inside, like I had to have surgery. So I'm like, wow, the guy knows me.
Yeah,
But
I just made it
that
up.
sets the scene. That sets the scene, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like,
I was on the ground.
where
They
is
were
this going?
punching. They were kicking. I looked up. I saw one who had a snarly tooth hanging out, and I mean, you're describing that scene and really getting
Paint
their
with words. Paint with words.
paint
Let
the
them
picture
see.
with words.
Yeah, let them see the scene.
So yeah, let them see it. It is exactly the way to do it. Characters is next. Who are the characters in the story? So in one of the stories that I tell in my TED talk, I say, well, we were in a situation in a very bad storm in the Red Sea, and I say how the what the weather was doing and how the boat was slamming down into the trough of 30-foot waves, and the waves were coming steeper than I've ever seen before. And I remember counting 1001, 1002, 1003, and bam, we would be hit by another one. And so I'm setting the scene about the being on the boat in this storm, and then I say, so I needed I needed a crew who was motivated and who was as determined to make it through this storm as I was. Then I looked over at my crew, Ken and CJ, and I saw that their eyes were as wide as saucers with fear. And I thought, well, I can't let this happen. And so I really just wanted to go down below and crawl into a bunk and pull the covers up over my eyes. But I was the captain, and I needed to instill motivation into my crew. So there was no way I could go down below and hide from this. And so just by that way, just introducing Ken and CJ was important. And there was another way that I introduced them in the same story earlier, when I say that, well, the winds were coming up to 20 knots, then 30 knots, then 35 knots. And then CJ shouted out, oh boy, I always wanted to be in a big storm. And Ken and I looked at each other and at the same time turned and shouted at CJ, no, don't say that. The wind gods will hear you. But sure enough, the wind kept climbing to 40 knots, 45, 50, 55. When it hit 60 knots, I knew we were in trouble. So I blame CJ for the whole thing.
And
I
you
certainly
can,
wouldn't want to blame my own leadership skills for having gotten us into that situation, right? So that's how I introduce characters there. And when you introduce characters, you can use dialogue. So there I had dialogue with myself, and there I had dialogue with Ken and with CJ. And then I say, so when I said that they were eyes were as wide as saucers with fear, and then I say to the audience, was I afraid? Well, I wouldn't use that word. I would use the word terrified. But I had a boat to save. I was concerned. I was concerned about the boat. I was concerned about our safety, my safety, but mainly I was concerned about the safety of my crew.
you were responsible for your crew.
Right. So now we can shift over to leadership if I wanted to. That's my opening, and then I can shift over to talk about the fears, or I can shift to talk about leadership, or both even.
And let me just go back to the previous example that you mentioned yesterday. And you just went on to that rant. It was so beautiful and such a beautiful transition. And you said, and as I was walking home with aching bones and muscles and blood dripping down on my shirt, I was thinking that this will never ever happen again in my life. Something needs to change. And then you keep a little pause. Remember the power of pause. Keep a little pause, and then you say, what is it in your life that you want to change? What is it that you don't want to put up with anymore? Right? So
Exactly.
power of change. So have that transition from your opening story to relating it to the audience.
Perfect.
And like in this case, I'm responsible for my crew. And yes, I'm terrified shitless,
Yes.
but I have a job to do. And what is it in your company, in your organization that you, so somehow you link it to leadership? And if it's
Because
leadership.
all emotions are contagious, including fear. So the last thing I needed was a crew filled with fear. I needed a crew that was motivated. So I had to be the one spreading that because it's contagious.
And in the book, you have a beautiful line. You tell your crew that it's okay if I break down, it's okay if you break down. The main thing is that we don't break down at the same time.
That's right.
I love that. And by the way, the can that he's talking about is right here on the call. So we have two very cool adventurers, seasoned sailors.
Yep. Yes, it was. We had physical breakdowns, and when we had the mental breakdown, it was like, okay, whose turn is it? Who gets to have the breakdown now? Who and it was, but we knew that we couldn't do it at the same time. Somebody had to still hold it together for the safety of the boat. So, all right, we talked about characters and the conflict. So, what is the conflict? What's the here? The conflict was I was afraid. Everybody was afraid. We were caught in a really bad storm. How can we escalate the conflict?
So
Well,
conflict, challenge, or pain. Conflict, challenge, or pain.
there you go. Challenge, pain. In this storm, it was cold. The winds were howling through the rigging. It sounded like a wounded animal. There's no Coast Guard or anybody you can call in the Red Sea. You can't call the Saudi Arabian Coast Guard to come in and rescue you. So it's and you're all alone. So you paint this picture of being alone and cold and caught in this storm, and what are we going to do about it? How are we going to get out of it? So in your speech, when you're thinking about what you're talking about, if you haven't thought of the conflict, create it. Think about it. You can build up the conflict more by adding those parts. It was
Somebody,
cold. We were alone.
and somebody said in one of my trainings that exacerbate, maybe I'm mispronouncing it, the pain. Let the audience feel what you went through. And I think it was Brian Tracy, I could be wrong, who said, never let the truth stand in the way of a great story. So if you have to exaggerate a little bit, make a point. Let that wind howl at 300 miles, I don't know, howl at what, but make them feel the pain. So it's okay. And if you have religious beliefs that you go to hell, then yeah, don't do it. Just stick to the truth 100% every time.
Oh, I think even it's forgiven. It's called marketing license, or in Hollywood, they call it punch it up.
Yes.
They say punch it up a little bit. So, all right. So you've shown your conflict, what the problem is. Now, what's the cure? What is the cure? And that's going to be probably attached to your foundational message, your foundational phrase, which is what the whole speech is about. So, what's the turning point for the characters? What revelation did I have that, oh, I have to be the one in charge here. I have to be the one who is instilling motivation into my crew. And then what can I pass that on? How do I pass that on to the audience? So what time have you ever been in a situation where you were afraid and you needed to motivate everybody? You needed to be contagious with a positive emotion rather than a negative emotion.
And in my case, that turning point that happened, I was 17. I started working out daily, and I became I became the best martial artist in my town, and one of the best in the whole region. And even at 51, I won a first place in a martial arts competition, competing against 20 and 30-year-olds. But true to my to my commitment on that day, that never happened again to me, because I was ready for the rest of my life. I'm like, this will never happen.
You never
And
got beat up again. Yeah.
never. And I protected many others when they were in trouble. I stepped in and I was able to protect. And so, yeah. And then how can you transfer that message, that power message, to your audience? And you should say it, like in my case, you don't need to get beat up to come up with this kind of lesson, and you should not wait for something earth-shakingly traumatic to happen in your life. You can choose today too, right? So put a little motivational spin on it.
Right. Good. So, and that's the next point, which is change. So how did you change? And then how are you recommending to your audience to make some changes? So when you give any talk, you want the audience to leave with something, right? To leave with something rolling around in their head that, gee, I had never thought of it that way, or I'm going to go home and make that change, or you know what, I get beat up too. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go make it so that I don't get beat up. And for me, it was learning about fear. And I go on in the speech and teach about how to manage your fears. And because I learned so much about fear that day in the Red Sea. And so the audience gets to take away the two-step method to manage your fears and to use your fears to your advantage. So what is your message that you want to leave the audience with? In fact, well, I'll just finish up one thing. So I talked about dialogue, right? I just want to make one more point, and then I want to hear from the group about their foundational message, foundational phrase. And we see what you can take away from that. But conversations in dialogue, as I said, can be with myself, because conversations and dialogue are important. It makes the story real. I thought to myself, that's a dialogue. I looked at Ken, he looked back at me, and we didn't need to say any words. We just turned to CJ and shouted, no, don't say that. Okay. That's non-verbal dialogue that Ken and I had, and then verbal dialogue with CJ.
And notice,
You can have dialogue.
notice that in the story, he doesn't say, and I said, and then he said, and then I said. No, he shouted out, I bursted out. So find alternatives to make sure that you don't get into the, I said, he said, she said. So,
Well,
and GPT can help you with variations on how to say the same thing, but way more beautifully.
And one of the next sessions we're going to talk about fat words versus skinny words. So you don't say things, you say things were starting to break on the boat. No, things weren't.
Actually, write that
rigging
down.
On the starboard side started to become loose.
Actually, write that down. You should never use the word thing in any of your speeches.
And the word said is so overused. And there are many other words that you can replace it with, and we'll be doing that in one of our next sessions.
So
what I'd like to do now is that you have the basics of storytelling. You notice that none of those points that I said include go off on a tangent of something else, or of how something else affected that story. You want to stick with that particular story. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to know if any of you have a foundational phrase, or doesn't have to be all worked out perfectly, but what is the point that your speech would want to give? So for example, Lisa's working on a TED Talk. What's it about, Lisa?
It's really rough, so I don't
That's
really
fine. That's fine.
I'd rather start with my foundational message, I guess. So
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of speaking, and I think for me, it's that the space that I'm in, my niche, so to speak, Larry, is very crowded right now. So I get intimidated and think, oh my God, everybody's talking about this, right? Because when I started talking, I talk about self-worth, self-esteem, and the power of loving who you are, because once you really learn to love who you are and be your best self, then you can really create your best life. And that's what I talk about a lot. But it's such a crowded space right now. So I'm looking for something a little bit different. I've applied for TED Talks and TEDx for years, and I never get picked. So then I keep thinking, well, maybe it's just not meant for me to do a TEDx. But then there's this little piece of me that's like, yeah, I think you can do it. So I don't ever say no. So I'm taking a different spin on my message. So I moved out west. So I transplanted my whole life from the East Coast to the West Coast. And it changed my whole life. And I really believe that right now I'm living my best life. And one of the things that helped me get there to that place is learning to play pickleball. So I learned to play pickleball. I'm getting better at it. I'm not, a pro yet. But I'm tying it to my message of when we believe in ourselves, when we get past our negative talk, we get out on the court, we play, we become a teammate, like how we show up, not just for ourselves, but we show up for others. How sports can also, like, I could spend the whole time talking. So that's the crux of it.
So what is the pain in the opening of your talk? What is your proposition?
So,
You have to
yes.
pitch the TED with a short
And
proposition.
what finally triggered that you're going to move? Was it because there was a pickleball union
Not
out
only
in the
that,
West or something?
but
Or
No.
triggered to learn about self-love, right?
how
So prior to
pickleball?
that, there was no self-love.
Yeah, so my base, you're right. So my basis is I grew up with low self-esteem my whole life. And then I went through, in 1 month, I went through personal bankruptcy. I filed for my second divorce, and I lost my job all in 1 month.
There you
And I had,
go.
and I had,
Wait, time out. That is how you're opening. That's your big bang.
That's right.
Yeah, that's how I open all my speeches, Larry. That's how I do all my presentations, to your point. Like, that's my base speech. And then I go on to other things. So that is my base. And then I talk about how we all let that low self-esteem, whether we know it or not, get in our way and prevent us from living our best life. So you asked me, why did I move to the West Coast? One of the things I always wanted to do was make a change. And I'm a believer in walk your walk, talk your talk, right? So I was like, all right, well, I'll move. And I've changed my whole life, and I am living my best life. And it's because I'm doing it solo and I'm doing it on my terms. And it's the greatest experience ever. So I'm trying to take all these experiences and put it into a TED Talk to get up there to say, man, we got to stop letting our negative self, do all the work for us in our brain, because really our life happens in our head. And I keep trying to tell people that, like, I do coaching. I'm like, until you stop telling yourself the bad, the good's not going to happen, right? So that's those are the core things that I talk about a lot. And Elaine has heard me talk quite a bit. So
And
when you made one statement in there, when you said, we all have low esteem or something like that, make sure you turn that to a question.
Okay.
So I had low esteem.
Self-esteem.
It's a low self-esteem. Do you? You're looking at the audience.
Have you ever struggled with that? How many of you struggled with that? Yeah.
How many of you struggle with that? Probably a lot of you. You don't have to raise your hands, but I want to know. I mean, I want you to know that I understand what it's like to have the low self-esteem. And you can talk about replacing those bad thoughts with the good thoughts. One of the things you might add in there is our brains, the job of our brains is to produce thoughts. But there's nobody up there saying, oh, no, you should only produce good thoughts. Yeah. Because you have to filter which thoughts you like and which ones you don't. And bad thoughts about self-esteem, about I'm no good, they come up there as well. And you've got to say, oh, nope, throw that one out. And you just pull it right out of your ear and throw it away and replace it with a good thought. No, I am good at this. I am good. And E.G., you were going to say something about it. Yeah.
Two points. One of them is, I would mention it in this talk, that and I would look it up, I would search it, like who says this, but many renowned brain people say that do not believe your thoughts.
Right.
Do not believe your thoughts. So that's one thing that I wanted to interject. And the other one is, as you talk about the struggles that you went through, there was a moment of awakening when
And it all
you
clicked.
say that something like, and I've seen way too many people go through their entire life into their 50s, 60s, and to the grave with that low self-esteem affecting how they live their lives, turning to alcohol, drugs, self-abuse, all kind of bad relationships, all that. So again, I'm exacerbating and this is all factual. I don't have to make up any of this. And I said, but not me. I will not be one of those people. I only have one life. I'm only once here on this planet, and I will not let that happen to me.
That is what I
Let it,
say.
and then will you let it happen to you?
Yes.
Always back to the audience. Always back to you. It's, and that's really important.
And I would say that, I hope nobody's going to do anything similar in this room. But if you are, you know who you are. I challenge you to take your life in your hands and also, like
take control of your head.
Yeah.
Where you're living. I love Ken's comment about, he likes the comment about living our life in our heads. It's so very true. So
I say it all the time. I just literally just said it to my son this like a half hour ago. I said, stop living in your head and stop listening to your negative thoughts, because another story that I just put in my speech, because everything I do is a story, and I'm always writing, and I'm actually working on my 4th book right now. But I was in.
I knew she was famous.
I was in Utah, and my children wanted me to go horseback riding, and I really didn't want to go because I don't know how to control a horse, and I'm 58 years old, and if you get on a horse, you're going to fall off and you could get hurt, and then I can't play pickleball, and then what, right? So all these things were going in my head. And so the night before we went, I was literally sitting there thinking, I'm going to fall. What if this? And then I said, hold on. And I snapped my fingers just like I always do. And I said, turn that narrative and change it right now. And I went, you're going to go horseback riding. You're going to get on the horse. The horse is going to love you. And you're going to have this great relationship with the horse. And you're going to have a great experience. And I pictured myself getting off the horse afterwards and saying, wow, that was so much fun. So like I manifested, I pictured the whole thing. And that's what I do every single day. And that's what I try to teach people to do. Because I think that we overcomplicate life. I think especially women, so women, you're going to get mad at me. You can email me after this and tell me you fully disagree. But I think women tend to overcomplicate or overthink life and how great it can be. And they just, sometimes we have to just change the narrative and make it positive and make it great.
I think that's both men and women. And maybe you're right, maybe women overcomplicate it more.
I like that about overcomplicate. That's, you carry that on further in the talk? I mean, that's
I really don't. I don't really include that normally about how we overcomplicate life, because I guess sometimes I'm worried that I'm coming off a little too simplistic, because there's so many books and so much research, and I'm like, you don't need all that, right? So like, you don't need to go to Barnes and Noble and go up and down the self-help. You just need to give a shit about yourself and start believing in who you are. And then here's some tips, right? Because all these books are all written from different people, from different points of view, and they all offer some really good tips. But you can read 1 million books. Your life's not going to change until you change. Your life is not going to change. So I think sometimes I'm a little concerned that I'm going to come off like not knowing it all, but like too simplistic. And I do think we overcomplicate everything in our life, that we just need to get off that treadmill.
Ken.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. There was a statement that was pivotal in our boat career that was said by somebody else that wasn't on the boat, and it's mere mortals do blank, and mere mortals can rebuild an engine. Mere mortals, and that has always stuck with me, and I think it relates to what Lisa was just saying with the overcomplicating on a boat. I mean, you can overcomplicate making dinner, right? And so when you're overwhelmed by something, and when I would say, well, mere mortals can do this. And it's funny because that I say that probably more than I should. And that I found that will resonate pretty much with everybody, because everybody is mortal, and well, I don't know exactly why, but I just think that what you said about overcomplicating, and you need to get out of your head for sure. People, I actually don't really have that problem because I've always had really good confidence. So it's kind of weird for me when I am lacking confidence, but I think that's a very powerful point. And you have some great content, so I'm sure that you will be coming to TED Talks.
So before we say anything else, we are almost at the top of the hour. If anybody needs to leave, but they have a question, please ask it now. If you want to raise your hand or just come off the mic, and we will stay around for another 15-20 minutes to answer questions.
Sure.
Larry,
sure.
do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I wanted to, since Lisa's the one in the lucky seat today, some people call it the hot seat. We don't call it the hot seat. We call it the lucky seat. Do you offer how do I get out of my head is what the audience might want to know. How do I do it? What do I just flip a switch, or what do I actually say to myself? Or is there a trick? Like you said, you flip the switch. I use a flip the switch in one of my talks as well about another topic. But give the audience the tool, how to do it, how to get out of their head.
And before Lisa answers that, is there anybody who has to leave and has a question, a burning question? You can.
So I have to leave. Unfortunately, I have to leave, but okay. But I would love to keep in touch with both of you. So I don't know, Larry and EJ, how I guess I can link in with you guys.
So do you have 30 more seconds to answer Larry's question?
Yeah, I can take it. Absolutely. So there's steps that you have to do. Number one, I say, pay attention to what you're saying to yourself, right? Because we pay attention to what strangers say to us, or we pay attention to what our boss says to us.
And what we hear.
Right. And then I'm a big proponent of also, I tell people, write a letter. If someone says something to you that upsets you, okay, write a letter to that person and tell them why it upset you, and then look for yourself in that letter. Like, I'm a big proponent of journaling, paying attention to what you are saying to yourself. If you took a whole day, just one whole day, and from the minute you wake up in the morning to the minute you go to bed at night and listen to yourself, you would be amazed at what you say to yourself, right? Like, so my kids make fun of me because I wake up in the morning and I get up and I go, oh my God, thank you so much for another day. Because I don't take it for granted that I'm going to wake up, right? So I'm like giving thanks to God or whoever. And then I have this whole ritual. It takes me an hour to get ready and prepared for the day. And they joke with me all the time. They're like, you take an hour just to, like, in the morning, right? And one of the things I do is I journal. What kind of day do I want to have today? I live in gratitude all the time. What am I most grateful for? And it's not the stuff like, I don't know. I'm grateful for a hot shower, because I remember when I was broke and I didn't have a job and I was, in personal bankruptcy, just the fact that I could still pay my water bill and had a hot shower, I was really excited, right? So I don't take anything for granted. The food that I can provide. There was a time in my life I had no money. There was no cash coming in, and a girlfriend handed me $250 cash. And she said to me, here, go buy some food. And it was like Christmas morning for me, and I'm Jewish, and this is part of my speech. I say, oh my God, it was like, I was so excited. I went to the supermarket. I had $250. It was the only money I had in my whole pocket. And I bought food. So I never take that for granted. So how do you get out of your head? You have to pay attention, number one, to what you're saying to yourself, right? And then you have to say to yourself, why did I just say this to myself? Would I say this to someone I love? Would I say this to someone I love? Like, I catch myself. Like, sometimes I did something that I didn't want to do last week. I bought Starbucks. I'm on a very like mindful path of how I spend my money. So I refuse to spend $5 or $10 for a cup of coffee anytime, except on Saturdays, it's a treat. But I did it on a Thursday. And I remember driving home and I was like, oh my God, why'd you buy that tea? Like, you didn't even really want it. You're such an idiot. And then I go, what? You are not an idiot. It's having a conversation with yourself and keeping yourself in check, right? So like if you're in a relationship with, if you're in a relationship with a partner and your partner says something to you that you don't like, you're going to call them out on the carpet. So start calling yourself out on the carpet. That's really important step to do.
Catch your self-talk and see if it makes sense. We live by certain stories we tell ourselves.
Yes.
And we believe our own thoughts. So
yes.
The key is
and they're only thoughts. They're just like air. It's like air. Like,
exactly.
That's right.
So I always say,
someone
like,
planted it there.
So many people I know are so sensitive. Oh, they hurt my feelings. They said blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's because you reacted to it that way. When someone says something to me that I don't like, I'm like in my head thinking, well, that's your opinion. Okay, next. Like, it's just, and how much do you value that person, right? Because we tend to value the wrong people. We tend to listen to, like, this is going to come off really cocky, but like 10 years ago, I started a TV show, right? And I started writing my first book and everybody wanted to give me advice. And I only take advice from the people who have been where I want to go. I only take advice from people who have been where I want to go. So like Larry, the minute you said like, I did a TED talk, I'm like, okay, you have credibility for me, right? Because I'm going to listen to you because you know how to get there. People want to tell you all the time how to do it, what to do. I love when people want to tell you to give me advice about divorce. You've never been divorced, but you want to give me advice. It doesn't work that way. So I think sometimes it's just about, like I said, don't overcomplicate life. Get smart and pay attention. Treat yourself. And Larry, this is the line I always say is treat yourself like your own best friend and you can live your best life. And that is the truth.
That's excellent. Excellent.
Great to have you, Rochelle. And if anybody has to leave, great to have
Lisa,
you.
Lisa, when you're doing this, how do you switch? You said a couple of things. If you can make them into steps, 3 steps to simplify your brain's thoughts. Step 1, step 2, step 3.
Right.
So they say that in your talk, so people are following your steps on how to get there.
So if
they know after the third step, that's how it's done.
Mm-hmm. If the focus of the talk is on how to identify and eliminate that voice, because that's definitely a powerful speech to just focus on that.
Well, thank you guys, and I'm sorry I took all the time. I apologize to the other.
You were the one in the lucky seat.
I was in a very lucky seat, but I will reach out to everybody. Have a great rest of your day. I'm sorry I have to jump off.
We'll see you next time.
Yes, thank you.
We'll have this about once a month. So
okay, wonderful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Anybody else have any questions?
And if anybody needs help or has follow-up questions, you can send us an email. We put our email address in there. We'll probably put it in the follow-up email as well.
Yeah, feel free to email.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk. It was really good. And I've got a few takeaways that, I mean, a lot of it I've heard before, but when you hear it again or you hear it in a different context, it's like, oh, and it gives you some ideas about what you can do. So
what stuck out for you? What was an idea that you might have picked up or reinforced here?
I've had people say, like, I've been coached, and there were things said like, to create characters and describe the characters. But there were things like you said, use more powerful words when you're describing either people or a scene. So like burst is a good word because, it's better than, oh, it just broke or something like,
Right.
It's much more just, I don't know, descriptive. It has more impact. That's the word. Yeah. So it just gave me a few more ideas about what I can do with the story, because I've got quite a few stories, and I'm thinking about, all right, which ones would be the best, and what words can I use, and how can I embellish that, with that license
Right.
to make it more powerful to the listener, and make them move to do what I want them to do. So it's just given me a few more ideas. Thank you very much.
I'm sure you've heard this, but the idea, the audience is there for one reason. It's their favorite radio station. It's WIIFM, right? Everybody's probably
What's in it for me? Yeah, I get it.
In it for me. That's all they care about. You can tell all the stories you want. How does that relate to me?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Larry, you mentioned 9 components of a speech. Some people caught 5 of it. Did they miss any?
Should I to listen ended with pure turning point? Why don't we? Where can I put this that they will?
We can put it in the follow-up notes, but also if you want to mention the last 4.
Well,
If you don't know them, we just say, sorry, I slipped up. It was 5, not 9.
I don't know. There were a bunch.
Well, now I want the last 4. Thanks.
Well, we were talking about conversations, dialogue. That was one. Did we talk about? I didn't talk about callbacks yet. I don't think.
Is it the 9 C's of
yeah. So
what are the 9 C's? Just read through them.
Conversations, dialogue, callbacks, the carry out message. I'm going backwards. The change that happened in you, and and before that is the cure. What happened?
So yeah, they have that. So what is the carry out message?
The carry out message is basically your foundational phrase.
Like what will they walk away with?
What they walk out of the room with. They walk out of my speech and they go, wow, I could use fear to my advantage because of what Larry taught me. Or now I know the 2 steps to managing fear. Or I understand that passion trumps fear.
What is your last point on that list?
The last one was callbacks.
What is the callback?
So a callback is when you go back to your speech. So back to the story. So you're in a different part of your speech, and then you call back to that story that you told, and you say, "You remember how fearful I was? Well, I became fearless after that." So you're calling back to that original story.
And I started with a story, and then when the story gets to its height, like exactly something happened, then you're curious what is next. Then I hold a pause and I kind of shift my body and I say, did something like this ever happen to you?
Yeah.
And I go into a whole 20 minutes or 30 minutes of covering the points of my presentation. And then I get back and finish the story. I say, you remember at the beginning I told you about.
That's a callback.
I finished the story. Well, guess what? At least 2 or 3 times I forgot
to do that.
So I made sure that I put it on my PowerPoint and on my checklist to close the story, to the callback. Yes.
Right. So what, like right now, when we're giving this presentation about the parts to telling a story, we could have a slideshow that would have 1 on each slide, so that people would have that instead of having to take notes. Although I like people taking notes, because when you write something down, you really remember it. And even if you don't go back and look at your notes, you remember it because you wrote it down. But it still would be nice to have, I think, a slide deck. Wonder if there's anybody on here who could help us with that.
So let me go around the room and put some people on the spot. Test. Probably I will hear the ding, people leaving. Jennifer, what did you get out of today's presentation? What was the point that most stuck out? Maybe you can use.
I liked all of it, honestly, and I know that's very general and vague, but
Oh,
I
that's
found all
great.
of it was really useful. What stood out to me the most? Well, I really like the starting off with the curiosity, actually, and just having that as a real starting point and then just building off of that. And I guess the recognition that some of the things I do quite naturally. So it really helps me to know that that's on track. Yeah, and just more of how to paint the picture, I think, was very useful as well. Like bringing in the senses, how to describe the scene and bring that in. Dialogue, something I've started working with.
And
Yeah.
today's main point, and I don't know if it came across really well, is that when you tell your story, when you deliver your speech, don't say it as a chronological description of events. Like in 1997, I did this, and then I did that, but rather turn it into a visual, beautiful, engaging description that pulls in the audience. And I highly recommend, there's a book out there, TEDx talks. I will put it in the notes. I will put it in the notes, but I have the audiobook and I listened to it like 3 times already. But it gives you specific examples of numbers. When you deliver numbers in a boardroom, for example, or to investors, how you can put it in a very boring way, or you give a report to employees around the nation. Like these days, they have these Zoom events, and you can put it in a way that people will fall asleep, or you can put it in a way that people like, light up and they engaged. And it's just stupid numbers, but you can put it in a way that it's engaging. Jennifer,
I just
how
put
often do you...
put the 9 C's into the notes.
Yes, we
into the
will
chat
do
box.
that. Yeah. Jennifer, how often do you speak? Have you given multiple presentations in the past?
I do a lot of podcast guesting, and then I also have a podcast as well where I interview others, but interject my own perspectives as well. So mostly that way right now. And then just recently, I've been asked to speak in various groups, like Zoom groups or just different people's communities that they have where they have guest speakers in virtually. Been doing more of those.
Very, very
Good,
good.
good.
Very cool. Well, great to have you. Robert
Thank-
Sebastian is actually my brother from the same mother. And we just delivered recently a presentation in Wyoming to a team of from all over Wyoming.
I saw that presentation, Robert.
Yeah.
That was good.
Well, hello, everyone. I try to stay off camera.
You did a great
Why?
job.
You're very handsome.
Well, no, I just came back from death, basically. Every couple of years, I have an acid reflux episode, and this was a terrible one. The part that I tell you, yeah, don't forget that you got to let the audience leave with something. Like if the guy walks in the market trying to buy tomatoes, right? Well, make sure you sell him the tomatoes. Don't talk him out of, you start talking to him and next thing you know, he goes home with a chicken. But then he gets home and the wife's like, where are the tomatoes? We needed tomatoes. So give the people what they need. But then if you're in a coaching session or in an environment where you can actually interact with the people and diagnose the problems, obviously, then you don't sell them tomatoes because maybe the guy wants to make some kind of salad, a Greek salad, which doesn't even call for tomatoes. So he thought that it starts with tomatoes. But anyways, then you give them what they really needed, not what they thought they needed. Because what we think we need is one thing, but what we really, really need is a totally different thing. And that's why these things are powerful, because sometimes you realize that maybe I thought I needed a vacation to the Turks and Caicos, but in fact, I needed to get out of my own head and not listen to my bad thoughts, but instead choose to listen to my good thoughts. And anyway, so the carry out, I think, is a big one for me, because that should be the goal of any presentation, to make sure that the people leave with some good stuff that they can immediately put into action, and that your speech, your presentation doesn't become victim to that thing where people only remember a very small portion of any presentation. And by the way, I just saw one last night, a TEDx by a solo climber, which I absolutely hate solo climbing on rocks. But this guy survived, and he got to talk about it, and very memorable. I remember quite a bit about it because his story was so compelling. So he did a great job with having people walk away, and he was talking about conquering fear by preparing, because he talked about 2 different climbs, and his carry out, the takeaway, the foundation was that fear is conquered by preparing so well that fear has no option but flee.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very
And
cool.
you brought up a very important thing. Like I know lots of coaches, professionals who are NLP practitioners or tapping or something, right? Like out there for some people, and they say, tap your way to inner peace or whatever, and 7 people show up, right? So instead of leading with, you know that everybody needs it, your NLP or your tapping or whatever thing you want to give people. Like for me, it was the DISC behavioral model. My first workshop was called the DISC behavioral model. And yeah, so don't do that. Give them what they want in your title, in your opening. Give them what they want. Give them what you know that it opens their ears, their eyes, stops the inner chatter, stops the because we are deaf to lots of stuff that's going around us. So if they see your title interrupt that numbness, that self-hypnosis that we are in, blindness of messages, and say, wow, I need that. And then once they attend your workshop, then your solution could be tapping or mindfulness or something. And mindfulness is a big one, so I would say it in the sub headline also, and even tapping in the description somewhere. But the title, subtitle, give them what they want, and once they attend, then you can give them what you know they need. Right. Everybody needs life coaching. Most people don't want life coaching, but if you invite them to a workshop about how to underail your life, because most of us, we had great goals, but then somewhere along the line we got derailed and we get into this rut and we live this desperate, mundane lives. And if I invite you to come to a workshop where I show you how to bust that and finally get your goals
get
achieved,
back on track.
Get back on track. Now, when they attend the workshop, I will invite them to life coaching and I will get hired.
Right.
But I need to get them in there.
There's a great little video on my website by Bill Gates and Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt was the CEO of Google, and Bill Gates, we know who that is. They both have coaches, and they say everybody needs a coach. Every athlete who is a success has a coach. Every why doesn't it translate to the rest of our lives? Everybody needs a coach. And here's the CEO of Google who talking about his coach, and then there's Bill Gates talking about his coach. It's pretty cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So
all right, we should let people go.
Yes. So if anybody has a last moment questions, we'll hang around for like a minute or 2 more. And
no, we won't.
Say again?
No, we won't.
If anybody has a presentation coming up and you need help, reach out to Larry or to me. And thank you all for coming. And again, if you have a last minute question, let us know before we say loving goodbye.
And make sure to visit ownthestage.org.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
As EG said, we're going to be doing this, once a month at least?
Yeah, once a month. Yeah, we can do it.
Okay. And we have a different topic, and maybe I think the next one might be about structuring the speech.
Yes, and I wrote down some things that we touched upon, but we didn't go deep in. So okay. we will talk about that. And you guys, you can send us a message, like a suggested topic, and
yes,
we can help you.
What you want to know about. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Really appreciate you being
here. Nice seeing you guys.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
Take care of.
Thank you.
And nice to see you.